I mentioned this story last week, but it's blowing up. The four exploits in Exchange Server are being used by hackers to access email accounts. It appears over 30,000 government and commercial organizations may have been hacked. Wired says it's tens of thousands of email servers. Now, why do we care? Why cover it again? It's gone mainstream at an exceptionally high level. It's huge and bigger than the SolarWinds compromise. I've been asked by investors if I thought SolarWinds would be long-term hurt by the incident. Disclosure, I own stock in the company. I've said no, and this is why. It's just a matter of time until the next one, and the next one, and the next one. But let me link to two more stories for some more context. Researchers are reporting that Alexa skills have some gaping privacy problems. Amazon doesn't vet the developers, and there's no verification of standards. On top of that, developers can use redundant wake words, so you might be using the wrong skill and not even know it. Finally, devs can change their privacy policy without notification after Amazon's approval. Wired is reporting that mobile can be just as bad. A significant number of iOS and Android apps are running with common misconfigurations that exposes data. This includes network credentials, system config files, and server architecture keys. Oh, and researchers found some misconfigurations allow the changing and overwriting of data. So again, why do we care? Because we're not fundamentally changing anything. We're patching and moving on. Unless we're talking about changes in design philosophies and changing out standards for what we deploy, we're not making changes. Now, this might seem like a downer, but instead, look at this as the potential. There is room to do something different and really invest in doing things differently. I swear I'm not trolling for these. Comcast has released data about the traffic last year on the internet in response to the pandemic. Peak internet levels rose 32%, and in some markets rising 50%. Video streaming accounted for 71% of downstream traffic, growing 70% over 2019. The first 4 months of the pandemic were about 2 years' worth of expected network traffic growth. Several U.S. senators are calling for an increase in that FCC minimum standard of the 25.3 from 2015. This bipartisan group is calling to make that 100-100. Meanwhile, we have some data on internet shutdowns in 2020. India led the way with 109 shutdowns, and 29 countries intentionally shut down or slowed internet communications. In context, T-Mobile has announced a home office internet service, which they're focused on delivering in the business space and specifically enterprise. The router is designed to be sent home by the enterprise to deploy directly into employees' homes. So why do we care? I keep referring to the pandemic as an accelerant, because it is. Broadband availability and perception has changed really fast. We had 2 years of network growth in 4 months. Dependence on connectivity increased greatly. Link that to the e-commerce growth I've been talking about, and we have a pretty substantial shift. There's an update your thinking argument here for sure. Let's update on that JEDI contract. It's been a while. Bloomberg is reporting that Microsoft might lose the deal. Why? The contract delays. The Defense Department has said it will reconsider the procurement if a federal judge doesn't dismiss Amazon's case. The Pentagon has said it would take too long to defend the decision and might just stop. So why do we care? Besides the fact I really enjoy watching this drama, it's the new legal perception. You don't have to win your case. You just have to make it painful enough. You can't wait. This has gone long enough. Is it faster to just start over? I wanted to highlight the danger of this becoming a norm. When we talk about legal troubles being not necessarily about who wins the case, well, here's a great example. Some additional market data from Tech Isle, quoting liberally from the linked research. U.S. SMB IT spend is forecast to grow by 7.6% in 2021 over 2020. Data shows that 45% of U.S. SMBs will be in the high-growth segment, with IT budget increases ranging between 7.5% to 15%. However, 12% of SMBs will experience budget decreases of more than 5%. The majority of the declining IT growth segment will be in the 1 to 49 employee sizes. But small businesses will grow their IT spend. How to reconcile the data? It's how technology is acquired. Nearly two-thirds of micro-businesses prefer acquisitions structured around leases, whereas one-fourth of mid-market firms plan to move to as-a-service approaches. IT services spending will grow by 8.6%, driven by managed services, data platform integration, cloud orchestration, and business process automation. 2021 will be the year of the mid-market segment, with IT spending forecast to grow by 8%. So why do we care? The big takeaway for me is that difference in acquisition. The smaller you are, the more you're using SaaS and leases. It's a bit obvious when you think about it, but that doesn't mean it's less relevant. More providers who've built their business on a core bronze, silver, gold, paper, leather, vibranium package tier may have baked in too much dependency on devices and endpoints and not enough on the management around those SaaS apps. Monthly recurring revenue is the base for a solid business, but it's not the only piece. The best-in-class providers have a mix. I know I've over-rotated on this in the past myself. In the future state, providers focused on smaller customers are far more system integrators and consultants than they are infrastructure managers. Is your skill set ready for that? Is your staff makeup? What's the plan to get there? That's why we care. More follow-ups to the Microsoft Exchange Server compromise. The number of estimated Exchange Server customers compromised is now doubled to 60,000. More scary, Microsoft may have taken too long to recognize the issue. Krebs on Security has a basic timeline of the event, and Microsoft has confirmed it was made aware of the vulnerabilities in January. It also appears there are to be at least 5 hacking groups actively using the flaws as of the weekend. Per Krebs, if your organization runs an Outlook web access server on the internet, assume a compromise between February 26th and March 3rd. The National Security Council added that patching and mitigation is not remediation if already compromised. Why do we care? I'm going to need another segment or retire This Week in SolarWinds to This Week in Nation-State Breaches. Maybe both. There will be a lot of follow-up questions from Microsoft to come. My focus here on this show will be less about the tactics of patching and more about the perspective. I wouldn't expect this show to be the place you get breaking news about these hacks. Instead, it's where we talk about why and what's next. If I were a provider at any level, I'd be asking really hard questions about why I'm actually still running an on-prem email server in the year 2021. It circles back to the first story of today. The smaller the business, the more everything is consumed via SaaS or lease. With this trend for all systems, why not sprint ahead? If you wonder why I'm so focused on cloud management, this is why. Let's hit some remote work data. As we hit the 1-year mark for the pandemic and the shift to remote work, GeekWire has profiled a number of ways companies have responded. Most continue to have work-from-home recommendations, with the summer being the point many still have as a potential return to the office. Of note, the culture issues have not necessarily been fully addressed. Of course, there was the much-discussed exodus from Silicon Valley. Telstra Ventures did a survey of tech firms in San Francisco and found 96.9% of startups stayed in the Bay Area. Of the ones that moved, 12% relocated to Texas, 21% to New York, and 21% to other parts of California. And it turns out American and British companies overestimated their ability to handle remote work. 73% of those surveyed by Tanium and PSB Insights say they have new challenges in IT security. Why do we care? Of course they have challenges. That's obvious. But the second obvious statement? There's opportunity there. Let's unpack the other stories. Don't mistake the shift to remote work with a complete relocation of companies. Been big on the change to work, but not one saying companies would all move. That's not nearly as logical. Moving your entire organization and setting up again when you have an established base, even a small one, isn't necessary if you're also dealing with remote work and those shifts. If work can be anywhere, yes. You don't care where headquarters is, but you're also not motivated to change it. You need to tackle IT and culture issues far before major physical infrastructure changes, so this prioritization makes sense. Do I think this may get reconsidered over time? Absolutely. That we haven't seen the effects of, but it's just too soon to judge on locations. What I think may happen is more company creation in less expensive cities over time, particularly as executives themselves become more remote and dispersed. It's an after effect, not a lead one. And we care because it's all just order of operations. Focus on IT security and culture shifts in remote work now. Look for dispersion of physical offices later. Want to ask, why do we care? T-shirts, stickers, water bottles, and even aprons. Pick up some of our great stuff at the link in the description below and support the show directly. Monday, a group of bipartisan lawmakers introduced legislation designed to allow Americans to hold foreign governments and their employees accountable in court for malicious cyber activity. It would eliminate the immunity given to other nations if they engage in cyber attacks. This would allow those Americans to file cases against hackers in federal or state courts. Also of note, lawmakers are indicating they're interested in a cyber breach notification process from the private sector. This matches the discussions happening during the SolarWinds hack investigation. So why do we care? One of the things I've noted over the course of this podcast has been that legal pushback, while incredibly slow, does work. Warrants are a solid mechanism to get data. Law enforcement investigations eventually do find and handle cyber gangs, and so this should be welcome. If there are actual legal consequences to cybercrime, it's one more part of making it less attractive to those doing it. Now, alone, this isn't enough. This probably isn't even enough to get cases through, and unless we fund law enforcement, we won't see much difference. But it's something. Bleeping Computer is reporting yet another ransomware. This one, called Hog, encrypts devices like the others, but it only decrypts them if they join the developer's Discord server. The Discord token actually allows the ransomware to authenticate to Discord's API in check, and then when joined, or if the server does not exist, the ransomware decrypts the files. Now, why do we care? In the spirit of continual learning, and for those of us not instantly understanding of the intent, here's why. This is a way to test ransomware builds in the wild. Not that you really needed more evidence of how smart these actors are. What they're doing is programmatically testing their builds. This creates an automatic feedback loop. And just because it's a theme for me lately, it's e-commerce. Here's a collision of physical and virtual security. Activist hackers have breached live surveillance cameras installed at companies like Tesla and Equinox, as well as healthcare clinics, jails, and banks. They gained access to images and then shared screenshots of their ability to gain root shell access to the surveillance systems used by Cloudflare and at Tesla's HQ. How'd they do it? They stumbled upon a super admin account from the security company Verkada, which sells the systems designed for real-time monitoring. Of note, researchers focus on the ability for employees of the company to access feeds without customer knowledge. Meanwhile, while I'm talking about physical, data centers at company OVH, located in France, have been destroyed by a fire. Customers are advised to use their disaster recovery plans, as the fire has made multiple data centers unserviceable. Now, why do we care? I've talked a couple of times about the concept of monitor the monitor. Let's do it again. The principle in security, trust but verify, isn't selective. Apply it everywhere. Your network monitoring tools, your surveillance tools, everything. Also, do you really need these tools? One of the questions a CIO, or virtual one, should be asking is the technology really the best way to solve the problem at hand? Is fake security just bringing us more security threats? Asking hard questions is where the real value is. IDC has updated their forecasts, now projecting 18.2% PC shipment growth over 2020. This is notebooks, desktops, and workstations. It's also a big revision from December's prediction, which was 1.6% for this year. Why? Rising demand and the sizable backlog from last year. Education and the work from home move is driving the surge. Now, why do we care? It's a sugar high. The reason cited is important. It's not a long-term trend. It's a short-term bump. Don't get me wrong, leverage it. Just don't build long-term plans around it. The endpoints aren't the long-term value. As with all trends, they come in bursts. After the EU enacted its right to repair law, which we covered just last week, the UK is implementing theirs. How? They're implementing the EU rules in the UK as part of their promise to keep regulations in alignment. This is done via UK law, slated for the summer. Critics do highlight that it's not strictly a right to repair law, it just requires the spare parts to be available, but not requiring those manufacturers to sell them directly to consumers or to regulate prices. Meanwhile, Nevada introduced their bill, AB 221, on right to repair. That marks the 25th state to introduce legislation around right to repair. I've included a link from the Campaign for the Right to Repair that highlights the various states' progress. Now, why do we care? It's a pretty sizable shift. It follows the usual pattern. Feels like all of a sudden, until you look at the long-term work that brought us here. It just happens in a flurry at the end. The ability to service devices keeps an ecosystem of repair enabled. I'd argue that it's not too far a step to see software integrators in the same view as those servicing hardware. A bit of a stretch, sure, but not impossible. Historically, a lot of SMB-focused service organizations came from this service and repair space. There's real revenue tied up in the ability to deliver those services that's being protected here. Finally, we care because if large manufacturers can keep small repair shops out, they own a services relationship that is direct. Do you want the big hardware manufacturers to have service technicians with direct relationships like this? If not, you care a lot about right to repair. Data roundup time. Some Canadian market data via Intel, quoting Channel Buzz. 55% of the Intel partners said that it resulted in a decrease in revenue for 2020. Worse still, that decrease was significant, with 33% being the average drop. 12% said the drop was between 50 and 75%, and 10% said it was over 75%. Only 15% of partners said that the pandemic had increased their business, with the average amount being by 24%. 30% said that it stayed about the same. Link in the show notes, because there's also some optimism in their outlook for this year. Meanwhile, let's look over at the AWS and Azure battle. Flexera's State of the Cloud tells us 92% of respondents report a strong multi-cloud presence in their orgs, and 80% report adopting hybrid cloud strategies. Flexera is also now reporting that while AWS, Azure, and Google Clouds are the top three, Azure is tied with AWS for breadth of adoption in the enterprise. Oh, and those respondents believe about 30% of cloud spend is wasted. Finally, Gartner on the managed services space, quoting Redmond Channel Partner. Gartner identifies 4 major trends driving the current provider landscape. First, a digital workplace program has become a business continuity issue rather than a nice-to-have, since the pandemic lockdowns went into effect in March of 2020. Second, there's a big jump in transformational deals, with large and mid-sized North American clients moving away from technology-centric, cost-led managed services contracts to engagements that are more sweeping. Third is an emerging focus on employee productivity and business outcomes. The other major trend among the 4 involves what Gartner describes as a digital channel shift on the service desk. This is where Gartner is detecting major movement away from manual service desk involvement. Across the 255 million annual contacts reported by providers in this research, 10% are now intercepted by analytics, 15% are dealt through user self-service, and 14% are handled by various forms of automation, including chatbots and virtual assistants. As a result, manual resolution is now just 30% of overall contacts, down from 65% in 2018. However, this digital shift is spread unevenly, and 5 providers in this magic quadrant are already resolving over 50% of contacts for their clients without manual intervention, and for individual accounts, this can exceed 70%. So why do we care? Let's combine these. 2020 was hardest on IT services companies versus their vendor partners. It was also pretty transformational. Closing the market share gap on cloud shows how mature the cloud products are. It's not a trend, it's a standard. During that large jump, read that as pandemic acceleration, larger organizations are now doing exactly what we talk about here: productivity and business outcomes, not technology and cost-driven decisions. And to make it all the more interesting, it's killing off the manual service desk with new technologies. The provider of the future is a business consultancy that has some technology that removes manual technology service. What I believe will be our last This Week in SolarWinds. Let's round up a few issues of the week. Microsoft this week outlined 3 new pieces of malware used in the breach and have added the moniker Nobelium to the entire package. These new variants were customized for specific kinds of networks, including a command and control backdoor, a payload downloader, and a process to find proxies and redirectors to access the CNC. Cybersecurity firm SecureWorks has found links between a piece of the attack and a threat actor operating in China. Also this week, the New York Times reported that the Biden administration has intent to retaliate against Russia and China. The first moves are expected in the next 3 weeks. That bigger Exchange server issue? At least 10 hacking groups are using it per ESET. The CISA says there are no federal agencies compromised so far. Now, why do we care? Are we prepared for an actual back and forth in cyber with Russia and China? And we being commercial providers? The landscape's continuing to get worse. I'll be rolling this coverage back into general cybersecurity news, because with the Exchange server issue being even bigger than the SolarWinds one, this is not exactly what I expected it to. Another marker on the continued breach journey. And I'll leave you with this sobering thought. A breach shutdown, Molson Coors this week. They're coming for the beer too, people. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.